Welcome to Medmark's webinar series. Today's presentation is titled How to Write Effective and Compliant SOPs. I'm Kate Klaus, staff attorney in Medmark's Risk Management Department. On behalf of Medmark and today's presenter, Joy McElroy, thank you for joining us. Joy McElroy is a consultant with McElroy Training and Consultancy. Upon earning a degree in zoology at North Carolina State University, Joy began working in the pharmaceutical and biotech industries in 1992 at Pharmacia and Upjohn, performing environmental monitoring and sterility testing. This work allowed her to move into a supervisory role at Abbott Laboratories, where she oversaw the quality control lab. In 1998, Joy moved to Wyeth Letterly and worked in quality assurance, performing GMP compliance audits, batch record reviews, and holding annual GMP training for new employees. Joy then moved to Mallinckrodt, where she worked in equipment qualification and cleaning validation. With 19 years of experience as a consultant and over 25 years total experience in the pharmaceutical and biotech industries, Joy has gained extensive knowledge of quality assurance, technical writing, process and cleaning validation, and equipment qualification and computer system validation, as well as Part 11 compliance. She has written and executed equipment qualifications and validation protocols for numerous companies, and her knowledge and experience have made her a highly sought-after engineer, technical writer, and trainer. In 2019, she opened her own company, McElroy Training and Consultancy, LLC, which provides consultants for various projects as well as on- and off-site training to pharmaceutical and biotech companies throughout the United States. And with that, I am pleased to turn things over to Joy.
Thank you for joining our webinar today on writing effective standard operating procedures. We'll go ahead and get started. We want to start with describing exactly what standard operating procedures are. They are referred to as SOPs. If you're in the pharmaceutical and biotech or biologics manufacturing medical device industries, and you commonly hear them called SOPs, and perhaps in some other industries as well. So what SOPs or standard operating procedures are is that they are a set of written instructions. We want to document any activity that is repetitive that our employees or our personnel follow every day. We understand that the development and the use of SOPs is an integral part of our successful quality system. Why is that? Because SOPs provide us information on how to perform our jobs properly and consistently in order to achieve predetermined specifications and to get the quality result that we are wanting at the end to produce a quality product. In our industries, we have to prove there has to be consistency, reliability, and reproducibility, and this is why we have standard operating procedures, because we have to show that we're doing things the same every single time, plus meeting those predetermined specifications every single time. So with SOPs being written instructions that are documenting our repetitive activities, what they also do is address every requirement of performing a job. We also, in our SOPs, will address safety, we address training, we give the purpose and objectives and a scope in our SOPs. We have to understand, since these SOPs are instructions for doing something consistently on an everyday basis, that they will fail if they are not followed. So it is imperative that we review SOPs on an annual or regular basis, whether it be annually or quarterly. We need to be reviewing them and making sure they are accurate. And also, they have to be enforced. We have to provide training to our employees so that they know that they are expected to follow these standard operating procedures. So they have to be enforced by management. So the purpose is, of course, as I have said, details regularly occurring work processes, that are conducted on a daily basis. SOPs document the activities that we perform, because again, maintaining consistency with any of our technical operations, and also SOPs are there to support our data quality. They describe analytical processes. SOPs describe validation. They describe qualification of our equipment, validation of our processes. They describe processes for maintaining equipment, performing preventive maintenance on equipment, for calibrating equipment, and also SOPs describe processes for operating equipment and for cleaning equipment. So SOPs maintain quality control and quality assurance processes, and they ensure compliance with government regulations. We have to have SOPs per FDA and other regulatory bodies guidance. And their guidances tell us we have to have SOPs for cleaning. We have to have SOPs for operating equipment. We have to have SOPs for writing protocols. We have to have SOPs for everything in our regulated industries that we do. We have to have the set of standard operating procedures to tell us how to perform our jobs and how to perform the different tasks that we have to do and go through every day. Typically, well, not typically, but SOPs specifically are going to be for the industry or for the particular manufacturing facility. In our industries, you know, we have lots of pharmaceutical or biologics or medical device manufacturers, and we manufacture different types of products. So there's not a set of standard operating procedures that it just goes across the board. Every manufacturing facility is going to have SOPs that are specific to their site. They're going to be specific to what they are manufacturing and to their particular industry. So there are components of SOPs that we have to be aware of, and I mentioned a few of these just a few moments ago. SOPs have a purpose. We always want to have a purpose to tell the reason that we are writing this SOP. They also will have a process or a procedure identification, and that can be done in the purpose. They have a scope to say, you know, this SOP encompasses this information or this area of manufacturing. You have responsibilities and accountability section. These may be listed separately, or they can be listed a lot of times under just the responsibility section, where we're telling what each a group of personnel have the responsibility for doing. Management has the responsibility to. Personnel or manufacturing operators have the responsibility to. And then you have your actual procedure section, where you're giving the instructions on how to perform the task, consistently and accurately every time. So you have your step-by-step instructions that are in the procedure section. Also, we have a safety section if you're operating a piece of equipment. If you're operating a piece of equipment, performing an analytical test, and you have to have safety glasses or any type of PPE, then personal protective equipment, then this section is going to address that. It's also going to address any safety concerns that may have to do with voltage or temperature or anything, any safety concerns that there may be that have to do with the task that you're performing, then your SOP is going to address that. A training section also will address who needs training or the training, you know, every individual reading this SOP, the training will be documented. So those are the components of your SOP. What then do SOPs need? Well, they need instructions on detailing the regularly occurring work that you have to follow. They need to have instructions on the activities that are to be performed to facilitate consistent conformance to any types of technical or quality system requirements, and also we said to support your data quality. SOPs may also describe, for example, any fundamental pragmatic or technical actions, like they may describe analytical processes. They may describe processes for maintaining equipment, for calibrating equipment, for performing equipment qualifications, for performing cleaning. They will also describe your manufacturing process as well. So everything that we do, if we have processes for investigating deviations, and we have SOPs for that. We have SOPs for change control. We have SOPs for conducting investigations for deviations. For every area in our facilities, we have instructions for everything that we do. And the thing is, we want to be sure that our SOPs contain step-by-step instructions that our employees, our operators, our personnel will refer to as they are completing their work every single day. Again, reliability and consistency and repeatability is key here, and what we have these SOPs in place for. So we want to make sure when we're writing SOPs that we have a clearly stated purpose. We want to make sure that we are clearly stating the applicability in our scope, the responsibility for performing the task, and who has the responsibility for implementing the procedure. That's in the accountability section. And then of course the procedure section tells us how exactly this task are performed. Now, SOPs, obviously, they're very beneficial to us because they do provide safety information. They also provide health and environmental information, operational information. So everything that is there that is needed to perform the jobs and the repeated activities that we do in our facilities every day should be contained in our SOPs. SOPs also ensure that our manufacturing operations are performed consistently, and that so that we can maintain quality control over our processes and our products. We can't manufacture if we don't do the same thing every single day. You know, we do not want to go out to the store and buy some over-the-counter medicine, say ibuprofen or acetaminophen, that has not been manufactured by that manufacturer the same every time. Because we don't want to get a bottle that has a certain strength and the next time has a different strength. So SOPs keep us in control and make sure that our manufacturing and that our testing, our release testing, our incoming raw material testing, component testing is the same every single time, and that those specifications are the same. They allow for processes such as our manufacturing processes to continue uninterrupted, and they also make sure that we complete those on a predetermined schedule. SOPs also assure no failures will occur in the manufacturing and other processes that is going to harm anyone. So they're ensuring that we're not manufacturing adulterated product, okay? And they also, we have to have our SOPs approved. So approved procedures are followed, of course, in compliance with all of the government regulations that we may be operating under, okay? SOPs also are very good documents to serve as training guides for trainers to use about training your process. You have your SOP out and you're following and you're teaching someone per that SOP, per those steps. Another benefit of SOPs that they may serve as a checklist for coworkers observing someone that's performing a job so that you can reinforce that performance. Another thing, as an auditor, SOPs are great checklists for auditors, because if I'm auditing someone and I'm looking at their process, then I have the SOP there, and obviously making sure they're following it. SOPs also serve as historical records of how or why or when steps in an existing process were performed. There gives you a factual basis for revising those steps, or when a process or equipment is changed. And this is why we review those things. If there is a problem and we have to have an investigation, then we go back to the SOP and we go through the steps and make sure that the steps of that procedure were followed. Well, they serve as explanations for investigations, not only for, say, investigating failures from some type of release testing or incoming product testing, but they or in process testing. They also serve as explanations, say, for accident investigations. If something happened in an operator or someone was hurt, then we go back and through the process, making sure that they perform the process accordingly to the procedure. So SOPs are very beneficial documents. Excuse me, I jumped a slide again. They also help to prevent the introduction of errors and variations because, again, we have to perform everything the same way. Also, SOPs are documents that should prevent misunderstanding. And this is what we're the reason that we want to talk to you about writing effective SOPs, because they're not going to work if they are not preventing misunderstanding of performing the steps. And of course, another one, that SOPs will improve planning and organization. So knowing what SOPs are, knowing how beneficial they are, how do we write effective SOPs? The first thing that we want to understand is that SOPs have to be written in proper and concise manner. They have to be step by step and easy to read and in an easy to follow format. We want to present the information in SOPs unambiguously. We do not want to make the information that we are conveying or that we're writing complicated. We want to make it simple as possible. We want to be sure that when we're writing SOPs that we're using active voice and present tense verbs. We want to be sure that our SOPs are simple and short as possible. Now, as you know, I said as possible. We understand that there are some processes that are long and drawn out, but we want to make the SOP clear, concise, and to the point. We want to make sure that when we're writing SOPs, we're conveying information clearly and explicitly. We do not want there to be any doubt as to what we are supposed to do. When I read an SOP, I want to know exactly what I am supposed to do. There should not be any confusion and any question. A lot of times we'll use flowcharts or pictures to illustrate and to explain our processes in a little bit, in a briefer manner, or to give a picture. A lot of people are visual, and flowcharts are very helpful, so we put those in SOPs. We also put pictures in SOPs for people to be able to see what we are describing. So there's a couple of different formats that we can use when writing SOPs. There's the simple steps format, and this is for basically routine procedures that are fairly short. They have a few possible outcomes, and they're pretty much to the point. Apart from any of your necessary documentation and of your safety guidelines, these types of SOPs can basically be a bullet point list of simple sentences telling the reader what to do. Do this, do this, do this. And then this is an example of a simple steps SOP. And of course, this is, actually very simple, but it's just, again, an example of how you should write a simple steps SOP the type of sentences, the type of language that you're using. We said we want to use present tense verbs and active voice because you are speaking to the reader. And you do not want there to be any question when the reader gets done as to what they're supposed to do. And so this is why we also want to keep the information as simple as possible, as clear and concise and to the point as possible. So in this example, it's a gowning SOP. And you can see that we've listed it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in 7 little steps here. And step 1, enter gown in area 2, excuse me, room 22118. Number 2, don hairnet, use mirror to ensure ears are covered. Number 3, don a beard cover if it's applicable. Number 4, put on coveralls, keeping sleeves off the floor. Number 5, put on shoe covers while crossing the bench so that the shoe cover only comes in contact with the cleanest side of the room. Sanitize hands for number 6. And 7, use mirror to check for proper gowning. Now, there are some pre-assumptions here in this SOP, and this is a good place for a picture to be added. We obviously have no question for step number 1. We know we enter gown in area number 2, and we have the room number. There's no question. We know that we're to don a hairnet and we're to look in the mirror to make sure that our ears are covered. We know that we're to put on a beard cover if it's necessary. We know that we're to put on coveralls, and we have to gown in such a way that we keep the sleeves off the floor. This is a nice place where we could add a picture demonstrating how to do that. Now, obviously, we should have trained our employees on proper gowning techniques. Then put on shoe covers while crossing the bench so that the shoe covers only come in contact with the cleanest side. One thing we could have said here to put on shoe covers or sit on the bench, putting on your shoe cover, crossing over while crossing the bench. There could be a picture here for an explanation. And again, sanitize hands. We obviously in our gowning rooms, a lot of times we have a sink where we would wash our hands and then gown, or we have alcohol for sanitizer, some type of sanitizer, and we would spray our hands. And then we're to look in the mirror to make sure that we are properly gowned. So regardless, this is an example of a step-by-step instruction. There should be no question as to what I do when I am doing these steps. I know what room, I know what gown in area it is, I know what room, I know that I'm supposed to put on a hairnet, a beard cover if applicable, coveralls, shoe covers, I'm supposed to sanitize my hands, and then I'm supposed to make sure I'm gowned. And it's not giving me option to do anything else. There's another format, the hierarchical steps format. Typically, this is used for long procedures, ones that have more than 10 steps. It does involve a few decisions that we have to make. So we want to be sure that we are having our information is clarified and that our terminology is correct. And one thing I did not mention is that typically we need to be able to have a definition section in our SOPs. If we use terminology that is not universally known, if there's some acronyms or there's some terminology that we're using in our facilities that, say, me as a consultant or an auditor would not know the meaning of that or the definition, then we want to define those in the definition section before we get to our purpose in our before we get to our procedure section in our SOPs. The hierarchical steps is usually a list of main steps, and then you have the sub-steps in a very particular order. So here's an example of the hierarchical steps. We're talking about a sanitization cycle. Number 1, if a complete sanitization cycle has completed and the USP purified water point of use valves were flushed, then A, the operator will complete the following sequence. The operator will complete the sequence as follows. B, the operator will command the USP point of use valve flush point to finished, the cycle will complete normally. And then number 2, C, sanitization completes section. So I'm understanding here that if I've run a complete sanitization cycle and it has finished, then as an operator, I will follow these steps. I will command the USP point of use valve flush point to finish, so I will turn it to finish. And once I do that, the cycle is going to complete. Then I have, in this hierarchical step, there's another situation because perhaps the sanitization cycle has not completed. So if a sanitization cycle has not completed and the USP point of use valves, purified water point of use valves were flushed, then A, the operator must troubleshoot why the return temperature could not achieve and maintain 185 degrees Fahrenheit for 60 minutes. B, after the problem has been corrected, the operator must take the system out of sanitization cycle. The operator must will command the BMS, or the building management system, point sanitize to disabled. So it stops the sanitization. And then of course, number 2 says C, sanitization complete section. So after I do this, then I know now I have to go to C to follow instructions for the sanitization complete cycle. Now we can offer notes. This one says, in this condition, the operator must restart the sanitization cycle again. That clarifies what we mean by saying C, sanitization complete cycle. So in the hierarchical point format, you have a situation that if the sanitization cycle has completed, you do these 3 things. If it has not completed, then you do these 3 things. Anytime that we feel that there is something that we need to clarify, we can put it in notes or maybe just a little blurb of information in our SOPs as to why we're doing something. Then we put that as a note just to explain something. If you haven't noticed that in these SOPs, there's not a question as to what you do. You're given a choice because it's a hierarchical step. If it's this situation, do this. If it's this situation, do this. But every time we know exactly what we're supposed to do. If the cycle, I'm going to back up for a second, has completed, then the operator will turn the command to finish and the cycle is complete, and then he moves on to the cycle complete section. If it was not completed for some reason, then the operator knows that they have to troubleshoot as to why it didn't achieve proper temperature. And then after the problem has been corrected, then the operator has to disable the system, stop the system, and go to the sanitization complete section. And of course, our note tells us we have to run that sanitization cycle again. Again, we're using active voice, we're using present tense verbs. One thing that I would do here, you see that the important words have been capitalized. I would also, in these, what we can do to give, make it a little bit more reader friendly and to draw attention to the important parts, is bold those capitalized words. Also, we have a flowchart format. If your procedure is very lengthy or there's lots of different situations or scenarios, you can use a flow chart. If it's more like a map and you have just an infinite number of possibilities, you do not have to use a flow chart as your only instruction. You can put it in step-by-step instructions and have a flow chart as an attachment. You can say refer to attachment or appendix 1, and that is your visual. When we put visuals in our SOPs, such as pictures and flowcharts, then it really helps the reader to say, okay, this is what it says, and this is where I can actually visualize what it says. Flowcharts are useful when results are not always predictable. And when there's lots of different results, and you think that even though you're writing it in active voice, present tense verbs, you are speaking directly to the reader and you're being as clear and concise as possible, there's lots of outcomes, or there's lots of different scenarios and flowcharts that are very helpful. With this one, there is, in this SOP, this is an example of a flowchart, and this was for the degowning. And I'm going to put my glasses on so I can be sure I see it. So here you have a situation that you are describing a degowning process. So you see it says move from the work area to the designated degowning area inside the processing room. And so use the next little diamond there says PARP. So do you have this equipment on? If yes, then you do this. You want to spritz and mist the PAPR hood and wipe it down. And then you want to store the hood so that the inner bib and the face shield are not open to the environment. And then you go back up to removing your outer boots, removing gloves, discarding them, exiting the room, entering the airlock, and it gives you the room number of the airlock so that there's no question to which room you should be entering. And then you enter the gown out room, removing your shoe covers, your coveralls, your beard cover, your hairnet. Just tells you to discard them in the appropriate receptacles and then exit the room. Now, if you do have the, if you have no PA or PARP, excuse me, I'm saying it backwards, PAPR hood on, then it tells you what to do there. So there's a choice, and we could put that in the hierarchical steps. And sometimes we use flowcharts with the hierarchical steps format because it gives you a visual. So I saw from the hierarchical steps format that I have a choice, but then this is a nice visual. It's in blocks, and you know, it's a nice imagery, so I know that I do this or I do that, and it shows me exactly what I do, and it's nice, short and concise. So it's just a good visual aid. So for XOP preparation, your organization, you should have a procedure, an SOP for writing SOPs. You want to have a procedure in place for determining what procedures or what processes have to be well documented. And so you also want to have how your SOP should be written, which individuals, which knowledge with, you know, what knowledge should be writing the SOPs. Ideally, when we say that we're writing when we have individuals writing SOPs, we would like to have these subject matter experts, the ones that are actually performing the job to write the SOPs, or the ones that are actually working through the process. Sometimes that's not the case. I work on lots of projects where I have to have technical writers go in and write SOPs because, you know, people at the facilities are just working really hard, and they're needing SOPs revised, and they're needing new SOPs written. So it's not all the time the actual subject matter expert. It's a consultant consulting with, or a technical writer, let me say, consulting with the subject matter expert. What we have to remember is that we were writing these detailed SOPs for different processes and for different testing methods and things, that we have to consult the correct people. We, as a technical writer, understand that we have to write it clearly, concisely, to the point, that we need to use active voice, present tense, verbs. We understand the types of formats that we might need to use. But the important part also of that is that we understand the process. So we are communicating with the appropriate people, and the subject matter experts, the ones that are actually performing the jobs, are the ones we want to talk to. A team approach is very useful when you're writing SOPs. A lot of times, and particularly if you're writing an SOP for a process, like a cleaning process or a manufacturing process, the team approach is very helpful. Now, it's not necessary that SOPs are written by only the individual who performs the task or someone that's actually directly responsible, but we have to, again, remember that we have to make sure we're understanding and we're talking to these people. So we have to be sure that we have access to the individuals who routinely perform the task, and the people that are directly responsible for performing it, so that we're getting the right information. Again, as technical writers or anyone that is taking part in writing an SOP, if we are not performing that task, we need to make sure that we're interviewing that person and getting an idea, a very good idea of how that job is performed. A lot of times when I am asked to write SOPs, I will have to hold a meeting with the various subject matter experts, maybe supervisors, and other people that are involved in performing that task, so that I get everybody's input and I understand exactly what is supposed to be in the SOP and what that process is. So when you're team writing is very good. You can put a team together of people who perform the job, have people on your team that perform maintenance on the equipment, because we have to have a maintenance section in there. You might have engineers or others that have designed the equipment or that have designed the process, so they understand the process. Obviously, the technical writer is going to be the initiator. We need a safety person, because they're going to understand and bring up and be sure that we include any safety information that might be necessary in our SOP. Also, an environmental person, and then an equipment manufacturer if necessary. When you team write, you get all of this information from a wide variety of people. When we team write SOPs, we ensure that there's comprehensive knowledge acquired from different perspectives and from all of these perspectives, and that information is applied to the SOP. Also, when you're involving the subject matter experts or the ones that are actually performing this job, you're creating buy-in. And when you create buy-in, then it increases the likelihood that the SOP is going to be implemented, it's going to be performed under the guidance of the initiator. We're not as likely to have to say, did you do it this way? Did you do it that way? Are you sure you're doing it right? Because these people have participated in writing the SOP. They have told you what they do, and we have taken time to understand their point of view and to see what they do and to put their information in. So it does create buy-in. It also helps trainers train people. Once we have participated in the in-depth decision-making, writing the SOP, then those of us on that team, and particularly those of us that are going to be training people how to perform this task, we have been involved intimately with that process, and we know that process. There's been situations where I have written cleaning SOPs, and I have had to go into the manufacturing area with the operators, and they have shown me how they break down the equipment and how they clean each piece of equipment, and what pieces they put in the washer, what pieces are manually cleaned, and how they clean them, and all of this. So I have gotten a very in-depth knowledge of those processes. I have made sure that the little tricks or the little details are there that they tell me in that SOP. So it's created buy-in. They were happy to have a part of it. They felt like I wrote the SOP that actually reflected what they did. And then as a trainer, I was able to effectively train someone on the process because I had an in-depth knowledge of it by the time I finished writing the SOP. One thing that team writing does also is it involves people from diverse parts of your operation. So it helps to ensure, excuse me, that anything that may be new or modified about the processes is implemented in that SOP. So that we don't have to go back and update and update and update. Now we do have to update SOPs, and that's why we keep them reviewed on a regular basis, but it does ensure that. It also encourages employees to follow the SOP and to listen to their coaches, again, because they know that employees have the initiator, or say us as me as a technical writer, whomever is responsible for writing that SOP, has invested time and effort on their behalf to get the SOP right and to make sure that we have put in information so that they can easily follow the steps. One thing that team writing can do is we can write or edit parts of the SOP independently, and then when we can combine them when we meet together again. So if we have a safety person, the safety person writes their safety section. The subject matter expert may write the actual procedure part, and then we can come back together and put all that information together. You can combine, circulate the drafts of the SOP, making sure the team has reviewed it and making sure everything is correct and accurate before we actually send that SOP out for a draft review by supervisors and managers. When you're writing or team writing SOPs, you do want to meet in the beginning of the project, particularly maybe once a week, and then because you want to establish your writing objectives, targets, you want to give out responsibilities, and also then you allow everyone, of course, to go work independently, and then the technical writer typically is going to be the one that is going to serve as a coordinator for the project and get everything back together. Understand that SOPs should be reviewed by several people that are qualified to evaluate the SOP. They have to be qualified to evaluate the SOP in terms of completeness and in terms of clarity of that subject matter. And this is why we have the individual operators evaluating the SOP, and we also have management. And then, of course, quality assurance is going to be the final review and approver of all of our SOPs. When we're writing SOPs, the things you want to keep in mind is how much someone knows about the entire process or the job, because this affects the way he or she will perform their job. You want to be sure that you have incorporated safety and health information and have it into the how-to steps. If there's something where we're telling someone to, turn equipment on, and there maybe have to use, close a safety glass or a safety guard or something like that. We want to be sure we incorporate that into the step. Also, SOPs teach the person comprehensively so that they have a complete picture of their job responsibilities so they're able to do that job well. So understand that their knowledge base will simplify the training. So we're giving them information in the SOP, and we're giving them enough information to perform the job. One thing we do not want to do, however, is be too wordy and give too much information in the SOP, because what we want to do is write the SOP to be as long as necessary for a specific job. But we do not want to give all these unnecessary details and say, well, if this and this is so too, we're not. If we want detailed explanations, then we can look at policies or programs. What we want in an SOP is, if we want it clear, concise, we want to use simple language as possible, not because we think people are dumb, but because when we're reading SOPs and we're trying to perform a job, then we need it to be explicit, to the point, clear, simple language as possible. We have to understand that all jobs will differ in the number of steps that they are required to perform properly. We do not, however, want to shortchange someone by giving them short and incomplete information, because if we give them a short and incomplete SOP, it sets them up for failure. So we want the SOP to satisfy the definition and the purpose of the job. We want the SOP to be as long as necessary. We want to be sure that we're not having some kind of standard company format, just throwing out their information that is not necessary or that no one has seen in years. We want to be sure that we're giving appropriate, accurate, to the point, concise information. So you want to make your writing concise and easy to read, because typically, audience is not reading the SOPs because they want to, because SOPs are fun. So what we want to do is we want to keep the SOP short and clear as possible. We do not want the reader's attention to stray, or they'll find the document formidable and hard to grasp. And some SOPs are like that. They can be like books, and you can have just paragraphs of information, and that is too much for the reader to read when reading an SOP. We want to keep our sentences short as possible. Now, sometimes it may not be the case depending on the process, but again, short as possible. So, for example, a bad example basically of how to write a sentence in an SOP. Make sure that you clean out all of the dust from the air shafts before you begin using them. Well, I understand what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to clean out all the dust from the air shafts before I use them. But look at the next slide. Vacuum all dust from air shafts before use. That is clear, it is concise, it is to the point. I did not use all of those words. One thing that we want to avoid using in SOPs is you. We're speaking to the reader, but we don't want to say you. You is implied. We want to speak in active voice, and we want to start our sentences with command verbs. So let's go back really quick just to show you. Make sure that you clean out all of the dust from the air shafts before you begin using them. There's the word make sure, that you, that's just wordy. And we've used the word you. Clean out all of the dust, that again, wordy. Before you begin using them, that is speaking, using the word you. It's just a very wordy sentence. I know what I'm supposed to do, but sometimes if I'm looking at it and I'm trying to perform the task, I may have to go back and read that sentence again because of all the words. Whereas when I go to this one, vacuum all dust from air shafts before use, the you is implied. The question of how do I clean it is not asked because it tells me to vacuum, and then I'm supposed to do this before I use the air shafts. So I know vacuum all dust from air shafts before use. It's just clear, it's concise, it's to the point. The you is understood, active voice, present tense verb. Short, complete, concise, and to the point. I have no question as to what I'm supposed to do. I don't even need to go back and read it a second time because it was not wordy. We want to understand that people tend to ignore long SOPs because they can't typically remember more than 7 to 13 steps. And I know I can't because I'll have to go back and read, okay, what am I supposed to do? If our SOPs go beyond 9 to 10 steps, we might want to consider breaking the long SOP down into sub-job SOPs. We may want to write an accompanying shorter SOPs that'll list the steps in non-detailed explanations. Or we might want to make the long SOP a training document, maybe a supplement to the manual or to the shorter SOPs. One thing we also may want to do is create work instructions, because work instructions are just step by step by step by step. SOPs give us a little bit more detail, and we need that detail, but we don't want long drawn-out paragraphs. We're not looking to read a 45-page SOP on performing an equipment operation unless that is absolutely necessary. We want to make sure that we prepare the longer comprehensive training SOPs. When you're writing SOPs and you're getting all of this information out, you can write them longer like a training SOP because you want to get a picture of what is needed. And then you can go back and break that SOP down into sub-job SOPs or into sections. If you just break your SOP up into sections, and then I have this section and I've got the 3 steps I need to do. I've got this section and the 5 steps I need to do. And then there's the next section with the 2 steps that I need to do. That makes it easier to put the information together, and then you can link these SOPs, or you can break them out into individual sub-job SOPs. You want to write SOPs, however, for people under different interpersonal circumstances. That is one thing to keep in mind as well. You're writing SOPs for people who work alone. So understand, this is a one-person job, and I'm going to write that SOP for this person that is performing the job. This is a two-person or more job, so I'm writing this SOP for more than two people. Understand that there's SOPs for people that are going to be supervising other people. We write SOPs for people who are not familiar with the rules that are typically understood. And again, we're writing SOPs for people that are coming into the plant or to our facility that may have never followed an SOP. And again, this is a reason for being short, concise, clear, and to the point. I remember years ago when I started in this business, the documentation lady that trained me on SOPs, or a group of us that started, I was very young, right out of college. And she said to me, SOPs should be so simple that anyone that has no idea what your process is should be able to read it and understand what they're doing. I may not understand the process, but I understand that I do this, I do this, I do this, just like following a recipe when, say, we're baking a cake or preparing a meal at home. So this is why we use clear, concise statements. We make the language as simple as possible and to the point. We use active voice, present tense verbs, and we use the various formats. We want to be sure that we consider the work culture within which the people work. If we write to people that are in a culture where they use shortcuts, then we want them to understand that this is not an accepted practice. We can't use shortcuts in our industry. So what we want to do is explain the reasons behind certain steps so that SOP users will understand the importance of following all the steps. We might say, do this in order to check this, or in order to know the flow rate of, or in order to see the conveyor speed. That's what we want to say. We also have to consider age. We have to consider education and knowledge, as well as skill, expertise, training, and the culture of individuals who are performing the steps. We have to keep in mind that people do not read all the steps before starting. I don't read all the steps before starting sometimes. So many people will read a step, they perform it, they read the next step, they perform it, and so on. And this again is why we bold important information, we highlight it, we put notes. And when we're putting a note in an SOP, we want to bold it in capital letters because we want it to stand out. That's information that is necessary that they're going to need to know. We want to also try to get around this habit of performing something and doing it and reading one step at a time, because sometimes it is necessary to go ahead and read and to know what you're doing. And sometimes we have to perform something and continue to do something so we can do something else. So a lot of times, in order to get around this habit, we'll forecast future events at certain points in that SOP. We want to tell the reader things they should know in advance, such as upcoming steps, and make them understand that this requires caution and precision, or timing and assistance, or that it needs personal protective equipment. So we might say something like, do this in preparation for, do this in order to check this. Because we want them to know, okay, you have to do this, but something else is coming up that's important. So that's important that we do that, that we forecast events, and that we make sure they understand that they can't skip over events. So we put that in words. Do this in order to prepare for, or do this so that this will be accomplished, or so that this maintains speed, or so that, things like that. That's what we want to do to get people in the idea of reading ahead, or not taking shortcuts. For another thing that you want to make sure is that each of your pages on your SOPs have a controlled document notation. Your SOP probably is one of many SOPs. So typically now your organization should have a database for cataloging SOPs with a certain reference system. You want to be sure that your SOPs have a reference code, that they have a short title, that there is an ID number. Be sure that your SOPs have reference numbers, they have dates of effectiveness and page numbers, and this should be in the upper right hand corner typically. Now it's going to depend on the particular format, but this is typical. Sometimes we may or may not need a footnote or have these some things in footnotes, and again, that's going to depend again on your organization's preferences. One thing that we do want to avoid is using certain words like shall or may. We want to use words like do, perform, ensure, obtain, or must, because we do not, shall and should and may imply choices. And when you're writing SOPs, you do not want to give someone a choice. You want them to know you do this and this is the way you do it, and that's it. We also, like I said, we review the effectiveness of the SOPs after a few weeks. We want to make sure that we have made the necessary changes after the SOP has been followed. And then, of course, there's always improvements that can be made in SOPs. Your organization should have an SOP on reviewing SOPs and how often they should be done, every 1 year, 2 years, however often. But anytime there's an update to a process or a piece of equipment or an analytical method, you want to be sure that you add that to your SOP. The last thing really quick here that we want to make sure that we cover is good documentation practices. Whenever we're writing information, we want to make sure that it's legible. Now that may be not, typically we're typing information on our computers, but if we have forms that we're putting in with our SOPs or things that need to be filled out, I always go over good documentation practices because that's part of not necessarily writing effective SOPs, but it's part of the review process. It's part of the good manufacturing practices. Anytime we're recording information in forms or signing SOPs, we need to make sure that our information is legible and that everyone can read it. We need to make sure that information that we are writing is concise. The document has to provide clear information that can be understood by all of our customers. Anything that we're recording, we want to make sure that it's traceable, where and why. We want to make sure that it's contemporaneous. The information should be documented. Anything that we're documenting or asking for documentation, if we're in an SOP, we're instructing someone to document a time, then we want to be sure they understand that time is contemporaneous, it is the current time. Making sure that our information is long lasting and durable, and making sure that it is accessible, that it is available for review. Anytime we have documentation errors, that's another thing I like to cover really quickly. It just goes along with good documentation practices and recording information on forms that may be parts of SOPs. And also, if we have work instructions and we're recording information, we want to be sure that we do not have missing signatures or dates, that activities were performed, that information is filled in. We want to be sure that we do not have write-overs, that we line out initial and date and give a reason code if that is part of our practice. Making sure that there is no non-uniform date and signature entries. Making sure that we are writing a note that an activity was performed on one day and signed on another is not acceptable. Sometimes we have to do that. But it is typically not acceptable. Do not want to leave blank spaces, illegible writing, or too many corrections. And when we're writing a good documentation practice SOP, these are things that we want to cover and be sure that we are instructing employees to do. So the principles of our good documentation practice is that all of our documents, particularly our SOPs, protocols, qualification reports, have to be original signatures. So we want to have a signature page where every supervisor, manager, anyone that was responsible for author signed off on that SOP, and then quality assurance has your last sign off. Be sure that when we're writing good documentation practice SOPs, that we are instructing employees never to falsify information, never to use white out or cover up tapes, to never obliterate information. It has to be readable. We have to see what the mistake was. Never to write over a record, never to use pencil. We have to use blue or black ink, and it has to be permanent. Never to leave spaces, lines, or fields or anything blank. and also never to use ditto marks or errors or any type of repetitive or consecutive mark to indicate repetitive or consecutive information. When we're writing effective SOPs, using clear, concise, to the point sentences, active voice, present tense, we're writing with a clear purpose, a scope, step-by-step procedures, using the various formats that we mentioned when we are including our safety section and our training section, and we are instructing people through our good documentation practices, SOPs, on how to write in SOPs and how to document. What this does is it builds confidence in your quality system. It reduces your efforts to comply with regulatory bodies. It allows for achievements of required results. It allows for correct, complete, current, and consistent information that's going to meet all of your customers and your stakeholders' requirements. It enables your activities to be arranged in functional patterns for specific actions. It creates structures so that the staff can systematically coordinate and conduct business. It is there to train staff. It serves as a very good training document. Also, your SOPs will solve complicated problems. It will prevent problems. And it also reduces or eliminates assumptions and second guessing. There's no question. I know exactly how I'm supposed to perform this task. Again, do not use words like may or shall or should. You want to be very distinctive and very direct in what you were saying. It must be do this, do that, perform this, obtain this, ensure this. So there is no question. The good documentation practices and effective SOPs will also eliminate the need to re-ask questions because your information is there, and it specifies clear instructions for all of your staff, not just your operators, but for everyone involved. We will now open for any questions that you may have. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, Joy. We do have a few questions for you from our listeners. First, why is it important not to use words like should or may when you're writing standard operating procedures?
Should or may or shall imply that it is not a must. It implies a choice. And when we're writing SOPs, we do not want to give our personnel a choice. We want them to understand this is how it is and this must be followed, and there's no variation. If there's variation, then we write it in the hierarchical form where we have choices, or we show that in a flow chart. But otherwise we want to use words perform, your active, your present tense verbs, perform, vacuum, obtain, do this, do that. Even the word shall is not a strong word. It's almost like, well, you want to use a very strong words like must be done or do this. I do see a lot of shall words that, shall do this. It's just not a very strong, distinct, decisive, direct word that is best, in my opinion, for SOPs.
And what is the difference between SOPs, standard operating procedures, and work instructions?
Basically, SOPs are high-level documents. They are telling personnel what actions to take under certain circumstances, and they're giving you a purpose, a scope, responsibilities, whose responsibility it is to perform the job, whose responsibility it is to implement the performance of the job. It tells you a little bit. Sometimes you'll have a background on the process or definitions of different words, and then you're given the step-by-step instructions. Whereas work instructions are going to detail the individual tasks. They're just going to give instructions in more detail on the actual task. They narrow down the individual task. It may be something like cleaning a piece of equipment, and you might have the instructions might say break down equipment into small parts, Then you would check off you did that. Soak small parts in lukewarm water, or water not less than a certain temperature or not more than a certain temperature for 5 minutes. Scrub parts for 2 minutes with particular type of detergent, and then rinse for 5 minutes. It's very detailed, step by step for that particular task. It's not a high level document.
Okay, and just one last question. You mentioned that SOPs need to be approved. Can you talk a little bit about who approves them and what that process might look like?
Yes, well, the author, of course, would sign as author, and that signatures always have to include a signature and a date. Then you would want your management. If it's a manufacturing SOP for a manufacturing process, you would have the author, you would have the supervisor maybe of that department and the manager of that department, and then quality assurance. Quality assurance, the manager and the supervisor are assuring that the content is correct and that it is accurate. The quality assurance is showing and approving that not only the content is accurate, but the wording is correct, all the guidelines are being met, and it's a compliant document to GMPs. So those are the ones that you want. Sometimes if it's a validation SOP or equipment qualification, you might have validation department people or engineers signing off on it. You just want the people, the author, of course, and then the people that know the process and signing off for content, making sure there might be a safety person, making sure the safety information is there, making sure all the content is there. And then quality assurance is your overall checking for everything, not only compliance, but correct documentation, and making sure the process is correct as well. And the quality assurance is the last and final signature on the document.
Thank you very much. I know your presentation will be valuable to our audience. It's a lot of really good practical information for them. Thank you for joining us. This concludes today's webinar.